The first sound was the slap. It cracked through the old wood-paneled hallway, like a gunshot, sharp enough to make the framed family photos tremble on the wall. A woman's voice followed, high and shaking, not loud enough to be brave, not quiet enough to hide. Someone was being accused. Someone was being blamed. And somewhere behind a closed door, a man who had not been supposed to hear any of it opened his eyes. Elliot Warren lay still in the narrow hospital bed, the thin blanket pulled to his chest. The heart monitor beside him beeped slow and steady, too calm for what was happening 20 feet away. The doctors thought he was asleep. The nurses believed he was sedated. The family assumed he was too weak to notice anything beyond the ceiling tiles. They were all wrong. He had been underestimated his entire life. That habit had not changed just because he was old. Elliot Warren was 81 years old. His hands were thin now, veins like blue cords beneath translucent skin. But they had signed contracts that reshaped cities. His name no longer appeared on office doors or press releases. Yet every wing of this hospital existed because of a single signature he had written decades earlier: Warren Health Systems. A network of facilities across 3 states, his life's work, his quiet empire. And now, according to the voices in the hallway, someone had decided he was already gone. "She has no right," a man snapped. His shoes scraped the tile as he paced. Leather soles. Expensive. Impatient. "This is a restricted floor. Legal signed off on that. I don't care whose kid it is." A woman answered him, lower controlled but tight at the edges. The elevator was down. The waiting area was full. "I told her 10 minutes. "That's it." A third voice cut in, older, dry, the sound of someone used to authority and allergic to inconvenience. 10 minutes is enough to contaminate a floor. Infection control will have my head." Elliot knew those voices. He had hired every one of them. The slap echoed again in his mind, not the sound itself, but what came after. Silence, the kind that pressed on the ears. Then a softer sound. A child inhaling too fast, trying not to cry. Elliot's fingers twitched against the sheet. Down the hall, the door to the supply room stood half open. Fluorescent light spilled across the floor, harsh and unforgiving. Inside, a woman stood, with her back to the shelves, shoulders pulled tight, one arm wrapped protectively around a boy no older than 10. His hair was dark cut unevenly, as if done at home with kitchen scissors. His sneakers were too big. His eyes were locked on the floor jaw, clenched so hard the muscles jumped. The woman's name was Claire Donovan. 35, environmental services, night shift normally. Today was not her shift. "I said I'm sorry," Claire said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It was already frayed. "I told him not to touch anything." He didn't. He just sat. The man in leather shoes stopped pacing. He pointed at the boy. "He doesn't belong here. He's my son," Claire said. "The buses shut down. School closed early. I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," the older voice said. Dr. Malcolm Reed, Chief of Medical Operations, a man who wore calm like armor. "You chose to bring a liability into a sterile environment." Claire's grip tightened on the boy's shoulder. He stayed in the corner. He didn't move. Dr. Reed looked past her, already bored. This floor houses high-risk patients, board members, donors, people who matter. The boy flinched at that, not because he understood the words, but because he understood the tone. Claire felt it. She shifted, angling her body so her son was hidden from view. "Please," she said. Not begging, asking. "I'll take him downstairs. I just need my badge back." The man in leather shoes scoffed. "Your badge is already deactivated." Claire froze. "What temporary suspension?" he said, checking his phone. "Pending review. For 10 minutes, she said. Her breath hitched. "You're suspending me for 10 minutes. For violating protocol," Dr. Reed replied. Protocol exists for a reason. Silence fell again, thicker this time, the kind that tasted metallic. In the hospital room down the hall, Elliot Warren listened. Every word slid into him sharp and familiar. He had heard this tone before, in boardrooms, in hearings, in rooms where decisions were made quickly because the people affected were not in the room. He turned his head, slow, careful. The monitor beeped a fraction faster. He smiled, just barely. The boy lifted his eyes for the first time. They were steady, dark, not angry, watching. "I didn't do anything wrong," the boy said. The words landed wrong in the room. Too calm, too direct. Dr. Reed looked at him, truly, looked at him now, irritation flickering into something else. "What did you say?" The boy swallowed. "I said I didn't do anything wrong, sir." Claire's heart slammed. "Ethan," she whispered. Dr. Reed stepped closer. "This is not a courtroom, son." Ethan held his ground. "I know. My dad used to say that when people say that it means they don't want you to talk." The man in leather shoes laughed once, sharp. Cute. Dr. Reed did not laugh. He studied the boy, then the woman, then the hallway behind them, the closed doors, the quiet. "Your father is not here." "No," Ethan said. "He died." The word hung there. No one filled the silence. Claire's eyes burned. She did not look away. Dr. Reed exhaled through his nose. "This conversation is over. Security will escort you both out." He turned. That was when Elliot Warren pushed the call button. The beep was small, insignificant, easily missed. But the nurse at the station froze. Her eyes went wide. She stood so fast, her chair tipped backward. Inside the room, Elliot Warren opened his eyes fully. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, ignoring the protest in his chest, the warning ache in his joints. He stood. The floor was cold. Real. He straightened his gown, reached for the cardigan folded neatly over the chair, and pulled it on. The fabric was soft. Cashmere. Old habits. In the hallway, Dr. Reed was already halfway through his next sentence when a voice cut through the air. Malcolm. Not loud, not sharp, final. Every head turned. Elliot Warren stood in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame, the other resting casually in his pocket. His posture was relaxed. His eyes were not. The hallway seemed to shrink around him. Dr. Reed's face drained of color. "Mr. Warren," he said. "Too quickly. You should be resting." Elliot took one step forward, then another. Each footfall echoed. "I was," he said, "until I heard someone explain who matters." No one spoke. Elliot's gaze moved to Claire, then to Ethan. It lingered there just a second longer. "Well," Elliot said softly, "this just became interesting." No one moved. Not because they were told not to, but because the room itself seemed to lock around Elliot Warren's voice. Even the machines down the hall hummed more quietly, as if the building recognized him. Dr. Malcolm Reed recovered first. He always did. Years in executive meetings had trained him to mask panic behind professionalism. He straightened his coat, forced a measured smile. "Mr. Warren, this isn't appropriate. You're recovering from a cardiac episode. You shouldn't be out of bed." Elliot looked at him the way a judge looks at a man who has just lied under oath. Not angry, not surprised, just disappointed. "You're right," he said. "I shouldn't be standing." "Which makes it interesting that I am." The man in leather shoes shifted his weight, suddenly unsure where to place his hands. His name was Daniel Price, Vice President of Compliance. Elliot remembered approving his promotion 6 years ago after a brief phone call and a longer background check. Efficient, bloodless, loyal to rules, not people. Daniel cleared his throat. "Sir, if there's been a misunderstanding, we can resolve this privately." Elliot didn't look at him. His attention stayed on Claire and the boy. Ethan, he remembered now. The way the name had been said, not loudly. Like it mattered. What floor is this? Elliot asked. Dr. Reed blinked. The executive recovery wing. And who decides who is allowed to be here? The board, Reed said automatically, in coordination with medical leadership. Elliot nodded. And who chairs that board's silence? Heavy, exposed. Reed swallowed. You do. Technically. Elliot smiled thin and sharp. Then, technically, I'd like an explanation. He took another step forward. Claire instinctively moved back, pulling Ethan closer, but Elliot lifted a hand, stopping her without touching her. His movements were slow, deliberate, the kind that made people lean in without realizing it. I heard the word liability, Elliot said. I heard the phrase, people who matter. I'd like to understand how those phrases are being used in a building that carries my name. Dr. Reed opened his mouth, then closed it. Daniel jumped in. Sir, protocol exists to protect patients like you. Unauthorized individuals pose risks. Infection. Legal exposure. Elliot finally turned to him. His eyes were pale sharp, unsettlingly calm. Tell me, Daniel, how long has she worked here? Daniel hesitated. He didn't know. He hated not knowing. He glanced at Claire's badge, now clipped uselessly to her pocket. 8 months, he said, guessing. 10, Claire corrected quietly. Her voice shook, but it didn't break. Elliot nodded again. 10 months. And in those 10 months, how many incidents? Daniel frowned. None that I'm aware of. Elliot tilted his head. And today, Daniel gestured vaguely. Today was an exception. Elliot's gaze slid to Ethan. The boy met it. Didn't look away. What did you touch? Elliot asked him. Ethan thought for a moment. The wall, he said, to keep my balance. Elliot huffed a quiet breath through his nose. Almost a laugh. Reckless. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Elliot turned back to Dr. Reed. You said infection control would have your head. Yes, Reed said stiffly. Good, Elliot replied. They should. Reed stiffened. Sir Elliot's voice hardened. If your infection protocols rely on humiliating a single mother in a supply closet, instead of maintaining functional elevators and clear emergency policies, then you deserve the headache. Daniel bristled. With respect, Mr. Warren, you're not fully informed. Elliot stepped closer to him. Not aggressive, intimate. The distance closed fast enough that Daniel could smell antiseptic and old cologne. I'm informed enough to know when power is being used lazily. Daniel flushed. This is about risk management. No, Elliot said. It's about convenience. The word landed like a verdict. Claire felt her knees weaken. She hadn't expected this, hadn't imagined it. Her mind scrambled to keep up fear, mixing with something dangerous. Hope. Dr. Reed exhaled sharply. Mr. Warren, let's take this back to your room. Elliot didn't move. In a minute. He looked down at Ethan again. You said something earlier, he said. About courtrooms. Ethan swallowed. Yes, sir. Why do you know that? Ethan shrugged. My mom works nights. I sit in the library a lot. There are books. Elliot's eyebrows lifted slightly. What kind of books? History, Ethan said. Law. Old stuff. Daniel scoffed before he could stop himself. This isn't relevant. Elliot snapped his head toward him. The temperature in the hallway dropped. Everything is relevant. That's the part people forget. Elliot turned fully toward Claire now. His voice softened, but the weight behind it didn't. Why didn't you fight back? Claire blinked. I need this job. That wasn't my question. She took a breath. Her chest burned. Because arguing doesn't keep the lights on, she said. Because when people like him say policy, what they mean is final. Elliot nodded slowly. You're not wrong. Dr. Reed interjected defensive. We are following the law. Elliot smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. You're following the safest interpretation of it. Those aren't the same thing. A nurse hovered at the edge of the hall, torn between duty and fear. Mr. Warren, your cardiologist Elliot raised a finger without turning. She stopped. I spent 40 years building this system, Elliot said. Not so it could run without me, but so it wouldn't forget why it exists. Daniel crossed his arms. We can discuss philosophy later. Elliot's gaze snapped back. No, we discuss it now. Because philosophy is what decides who gets escorted out and who gets protected. He reached into his cardigan pocket, pulled out a small folded card. A simple thing. Off-white. Thick paper. He held it between two fingers. Daniel's breath caught. Elliot looked at him. Do you recognize this? Daniel's mouth went dry. That's not appropriate. It's my temporary visitor badge, Elliot said. Issued to me 3 hours ago. The same system you just used to deactivate hers. He looked at Claire's empty badge clip. Tell me again how rigid the rules are. Dr. Reed's face flushed. That was a clerical Elliot cut him off. No, that was a choice. The hallway had gone silent. Phones forgotten. Charts abandoned. People watched from doorways frozen. Elliot turned to the nurse. Page the board. All of them. Emergency session. Now. The nurse stared. Sir, that requires my signature, Elliot said. Already done. Daniel stared at the card. You can't be serious. Elliot met his eyes. I'm very serious and very awake. He looked at Claire. You're not suspended. Claire's breath broke. Sir, you're reassigned, Elliot said. Effective immediately. Dr. Reed stiffened. To what department? Elliot smiled, slow and deliberate. Mine. Daniel barked a short laugh. You don't have a department. Elliot leaned in again. I have a mandate. He turned his attention back to Ethan. What do you want to be when you grow up? The question cut through the tension unexpected. Ethan hesitated. I don't know. That's honest, Elliot said. What do you like? Ethan glanced at his mother. She nodded barely. I like figuring things out. Why things are the way they are. Elliot nodded. So do I. He straightened the weight of the room, settling around him like a crown. Malcolm Daniel, he said, this building doesn't have a liability problem. It has a memory problem. And we're about to fix it. Sirens wailed faintly outside, a reminder that the world kept moving. Elliot turned back toward his room, already walking. Claire, he said over his shoulder, don't leave. She didn't. Behind them, Daniel Price felt something unfamiliar twist in his stomach. Not fear. Not yet. Uncertainty. And that he knew was worse. The boardroom smelled like polished oak and old money. Not the kind that tried to impress, but the kind that assumed it never had to. The long table stretched beneath recessed lighting, every chair occupied, every screen lit. Faces stared back at Elliot Warren through glass and distance, some from across the city, others from offices hundreds of miles away. Men and women who had built careers around his absence. People who spoke his name carefully, now that he was supposed to be weak. Elliot sat at the head of the table, wrapped in a cardigan that hid the heart monitor taped beneath his shirt. His hands rested flat on the wood. Still. Commanding. The room waited for him to begin. Daniel Price cleared his throat. This meeting was called without quorum notice. Elliot didn't look at him. You're here. That doesn't make it lawful. Elliot's eyes lifted sharp and unblinking. Neither does suspending an employee without cause while misusing emergency protocols. But here we are. A murmur rippled through the screens. Names whispered. Someone leaned back. Someone else leaned forward. Dr. Malcolm Reed adjusted his glasses. We're drifting from the issue. Mr. Warren's health. My health. Elliot said cutting in is being handled by professionals who are not on this call. This meeting is about governance. The word landed heavy. On the far side of the room, Claire Donovan sat stiffly in a chair too big for her. She had been given a badge again, temporary white instead of blue. Visitor, printed in block letters. She kept her hands folded in her lap, knuckles pale. Ethan sat beside her feet, dangling eyes tracking everything. The screens, the voices, the way men with silver hair spoke, as if the world bent when they finished a sentence. One of the board members, a woman in her late 60s with sharp cheekbones and sharper eyes, leaned closer to her camera. Elliot, why is there a custodial employee in the boardroom? Elliot turned his head slowly. Because she was treated like she didn't exist. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. Daniel leaned forward, hands flat on the table. With respect, this is inappropriate theater. Elliot's gaze snapped to him. Theater is what you've been running while I was unconscious. A few heads jerked up. Elliot continued, his voice steady. You've restructured staffing on this floor twice in 5 years, reduced coverage, outsourced training, increased compliance audits, while cutting actual support. And today, instead of owning a systems failure, you chose a scapegoat. Dr. Reed frowned. You don't have the full picture, I have enough, Elliot said, because I remember why this hospital was built. He stood. The room shifted instinctively. Chairs creaked. Someone inhaled sharply. My wife died in a place like this, Elliot said. Not this building. Another one. Same rules, same language. She waited 6 hours for a bed because someone decided her chart wasn't urgent enough. Silence fell. Real silence, not procedural. She wasn't a donor. Elliot continued. She wasn't a board member. She was a woman in pain who trusted a system that didn't see her. Claire felt her throat tighten. Ethan's fingers curled into the fabric of her sleeve. Elliot exhaled. I promised myself that if I ever had the power, I'd build something better. Daniel scoffed quietly. This is emotional revisionism. Elliot's eyes hardened. This is accountability. A voice came from one of the screens. Younger, nervous. Are you suggesting policy changes based on anecdotal experience? Elliot nodded. Yes, because systems fail. People one story at a time. He gestured toward Claire. Ms. Donovan followed procedure as best she could in an emergency. Your system failed her, and when it did, you punished her. Dr. Reed crossed his arms. We are not in the business of sentiment. No, Elliot said. You're in the business of care. You just forgot. Daniel shook his head. This is dangerous precedent. Elliot stepped closer to the table. So is letting men like you decide who matters. The air cracked. Ethan shifted in his seat. Excuse me? He said. Every head turned. Claire whispered, Ethan, no. Elliot lifted a hand. Let him speak. Ethan swallowed. His voice was small but steady. You keep saying rules, he said. My dad used to say rules are supposed to help people do the right thing when they don't know each other. Daniel frowned. This is not a forum for Elliot, cut him off. It is now. Ethan looked at the screens. Faces loomed large, powerful, distant. If the rule makes you hurt someone who didn't do anything wrong, he said, maybe it's not a good rule. A board member laughed softly, not mocking, uncomfortable. That's very simple. Elliot smiled faintly. That's usually how truth sounds. Daniel's jaw tightened. Are we really letting a child dictate corporate policy? Elliot turned to him slow and lethal. You let a spreadsheet dictate empathy. Daniel opened his mouth, then stopped. Elliot straightened. This ends now. He tapped the table once. Hard, final, effective. Immediately, he said, there will be an independent audit of executive floor protocols. Compliance will no longer override common sense. and any disciplinary action taken today is reversed. Dr. Reed's face darkened. You can't unilaterally. I can, Elliot said. Because I never stepped down. The room erupted. What? That's impossible. You filed, Elliot raised his voice for the first time. Not loud. Absolute. I filed a temporary medical delegation. Not a resignation. Read the documents you approved. Daniel's blood drained from his face. Elliot continued relentless. While you were busy consolidating power, I was watching. Quietly. And now I'm back. Claire's heart pounded. Ethan stared at Elliot, awe, flickering into something deeper. Recognition. Elliot turned to Claire. Ms. Donovan, you're not reassigned to me as staff. She blinked. Sir, you're reassigned as a witness, he said. Effective today, you report directly to the Ethics Review Committee. Dr. Reed stiffened. That's unprecedented. Elliot nodded. So is silencing a mother in a supply closet. He looked at Ethan. And you, he said softer now. You did nothing wrong. Ethan nodded once, like he already knew. Elliot sat back down. The room buzzed with panic and recalculation. Daniel Price stared at the table. For the first time in his career, the rules he trusted had failed him. Elliot folded his hands. This meeting is adjourned. The screens went dark one by one. When the room finally emptied, Claire exhaled a breath she had been holding for years. Ethan leaned closer to her. Mom, he whispered. Is he important? Claire looked at Elliot Warren, standing alone at the window, the city reflected in his eyes. Yes, she said quietly, but not for the reason they think. Elliot turned back toward them, expression unreadable. This isn't over, he said. And for the first time, Claire believed him. The audit began quietly, which was how Elliot Warren preferred it. No press releases, no town halls, just emails that landed in inboxes before sunrise, written in careful language that could not be misunderstood. External review. Temporary authority. Mandatory cooperation. The kind of words that made people sit up straighter without knowing why. By noon, the building felt different. Not louder. Tighter. Conversations cut short when footsteps approached. Doors closed more slowly. Eyes followed Claire Donovan as she walked the executive floor with a badge that no longer said visitor. It said review. She felt every stare. You all right? Asked Marissa, a nurse who had worked nights for 15 years and trusted no one in administration. Claire nodded. I think so. Marissa studied her face. They don't like it when the floor tilts. Claire didn't answer. She was still getting used to the way people spoke to her now. More careful, less dismissive, as if she had become something fragile and dangerous at the same time. Ethan waited in the small conference room near the window legs, tucked beneath the chair, a borrowed tablet balanced on his knees. He was supposed to be doing homework. He wasn't. He was watching people through the glass, how they leaned toward one another, how they went quiet when Elliot passed. Elliot moved through the corridors with measured steps, one hand often resting against the wall. He ignored the looks. He always had. What interested him were the pauses, the hesitations, the moments where someone almost spoke and didn't. That was where truth lived. Daniel Price sat in his office, staring at an empty legal pad. The words he had written an hour earlier had been torn out and shredded. He had not slept. The certainty he had built his career on had developed cracks overnight, and every email from compliance felt like another tap against glass. He replayed the board meeting again and again, the moment Elliot had said he never stepped down. The way no one had challenged it. The way the power he thought he held had evaporated in a single sentence. There was a knock. Come in, Daniel said. Claire stepped inside. Daniel stood. Too fast. Ms. Donovan. She closed the door behind her. Mr. Price. The air between them felt formal, brittle. I'm here to ask about the suspension, Claire said. The process. Who initiated it? Daniel gestured to the chair. Please. She didn't sit. Daniel exhaled. It was my call. Claire nodded. Why? Because it was efficient, he said. The honesty surprised even him, because that's what the system rewards. And now Daniel looked at her. Really looked. Now the system is changing. Claire held his gaze. Systems don't change on their own. Daniel's jaw tightened. No. She waited. Dr. Reed and I, he said slowly, have been managing the executive wing for years. Donors expect predictability, control, no surprises. Claire's voice stayed level. I wasn't a surprise. I was a problem you didn't want to deal with. Daniel didn't argue. Yes. The word landed heavy. Claire turned toward the door. Thank you for your honesty. Daniel watched her leave. For the first time, he wondered what it would cost him to tell the truth again. Across the floor, Dr. Malcolm Reed sat with his arms crossed, as an external consultant, flipped through binders. Every page turned felt like an accusation. This policy, the consultant said, tapping a paragraph. It allows discretionary enforcement without documentation. Reed leaned back. That's standard. It's convenient, the consultant corrected. There's a difference. Reed's lips pressed thin. He glanced through the glass wall and caught sight of Elliot standing near the nurse's station, listening. Always listening. Reed felt something twist in his chest. Not guilt. Something colder. Fear. That afternoon, Elliot called Claire into his temporary office, not the one with the view, a smaller room, closer to the ground. Sit, he said. She did. Elliot poured water into 2 paper cups. His hands shook slightly. He ignored it. You didn't ask for this? No, Claire said. I didn't. Good, Elliot replied. People who do usually want the wrong thing. She hesitated. Why me? Elliot studied her face. The exhaustion she tried to hide. The resolve underneath it. Because you didn't argue when you could have, he said. And you didn't apologize for existing. Claire swallowed. I was scared. So was I, Elliot said. I still am. That surprised her. I built this place to protect people. He continued. Then I let it grow teeth. Claire thought of the supply room. The slap she hadn't seen but had felt in her bones. What happens now? Elliot's eyes hardened. Now we see who this place serves. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows through the glass atrium. Ethan waited with Marissa, tracing the outline of the building on a scrap of paper. Your mom's brave, Marissa said. Ethan shrugged. She says brave is what people call you when you don't have another option. Marissa smiled sadly. She's not wrong. Elliot joined them as the day staff filtered out. Ready? He asked. Claire nodded. They walked together toward the exit. 3 figures reflected in the glass. Uneven. Unlikely. At the doors, Elliot stopped. Ethan? Yes, sir. Do you know what happens when you challenge a system? Ethan thought. People get mad. Elliot smiled faintly. Yes? And then they show you who they really are. As they stepped into the evening air, Claire felt the weight of the building lift slightly from her shoulders. Not gone. Just lighter. Behind them, inside the hospital, phones rang. Emails sent, meetings scheduled. The system resisted. Elliot welcomed that. Because resistance meant it was finally awake. The first resignation came before sunrise. It arrived in Elliot Warren's inbox at 5:16 in the morning, a single line buried beneath formal language and legal courtesy. Dr. Malcolm Reed. Effective immediately. No farewell, no explanation, just distance. Elliot read it once, then closed the message without expression. Down the hall, Daniel Price sat in his car with the engine-off forehead pressed against the steering wheel. He had drafted 3 versions of his own letter and deleted all of them. Each sounded like an excuse. Each sounded like fear. He stayed where he was until the sky lightened, then finally opened the door and stepped back into the building. Inside, the mood had shifted again. Not tight this time, uneasy. Like a house, after an argument where no one knew who would speak first. Claire felt it the moment she stepped off the elevator. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Someone dropped a folder. Another pretended not to see her. The badge, clipped to her jacket, felt heavier today, as if it had absorbed the weight of other people's resentment. You hear Marissa murmured, as they passed at the nurse's station. "About Reed?" Claire asked. Marissa nodded. "They're saying it's just the beginning." Claire didn't answer. She was watching the way supervisors moved, now shoulders, stiff voices lower. Watching how people who once barked orders suddenly asked questions. Power rearranged itself quickly when it felt threatened. Ethan waited in the family room with a book open in his lap, though his eyes weren't moving across the page. He had noticed the looks, too. The way some people smiled too much now. The way others avoided him completely. A man in a suit walked past and stopped. "You're the kid," he said. Ethan looked up. "I have a name." The man blinked, startled. "Right. Sorry. I just meant you caused quite a stir." Ethan closed the book. "I didn't mean to." The man hesitated, then smiled thinly. "That's usually how it happens." He walked away before Ethan could reply. Elliot called Daniel into his office just after 9. Daniel stood by the door until Elliot looked up. "Sit," Elliot said. Daniel sat. They didn't speak for a moment. The silence stretched. It was not uncomfortable for Elliot. It was torture for Daniel. "You didn't resign," Elliot said finally. Daniel nodded. "No." Why? Daniel swallowed. "Because I need to understand where I went wrong." Elliot studied him. "You already do." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I followed the rules." "You followed the incentives," Elliot corrected. "There's a difference." Daniel leaned forward. "Then why keep me?" Elliot's gaze sharpened. "Because you're scared. And scared men either double down or change." Daniel held his breath. "Which one are you?" Elliot asked. Daniel exhaled slowly. "I don't know yet." Elliot nodded. "That's an honest answer. It buys you time." He slid a folder across the desk. Daniel recognized the label immediately. Executive Compensation Review. "What is this?" Daniel asked. "A mirror," Elliot said. "You'll lead it." Daniel's eyes widened. "You're asking me to investigate myself. I'm asking you to decide who you want to be when no one is watching." Elliot replied. Daniel closed the folder carefully. "People will hate me." Elliot shrugged. "They already do. They just haven't admitted it." Daniel stood steadier now. "Thank you." Elliot waved him out. "Don't thank me yet." By midday, the news had spread beyond the building. A local reporter stood across the street, camera angled just so. A former employee posted a long thread online about favoritism and fear. Comments poured in, some grateful, some furious. Inside, Claire sat across from a woman named Patricia Klein, head of human resources. Patricia's smile was professional practiced. "This situation has created a lot of tension," Patricia said. Claire nodded. "I'm aware." Patricia folded her hands. "You must understand people feel threatened." Claire met her eyes. "So did I." Patricia blinked. "This isn't personal. It never is," Claire said. "Until it is." Patricia exhaled. "What do you want?" Claire considered the question. Really considered it. "I want consistency," she said. "I want rules that don't change depending on who you are." Patricia nodded slowly. "That's ambitious." Claire stood. "It's necessary." That afternoon, Elliot watched Ethan from the window as the boy sat on the floor, surrounded by papers and markers. He was drawing the hospital, not the building, the people inside it. Stick figures with names written carefully beside them. Elliot felt something tighten in his chest. Not pain, recognition. "You see things," Elliot said quietly. Ethan looked up. "My dad used to say people are easier to understand when you draw them." Elliot smiled faintly. "Your dad sounds like a smart man." "He was," Ethan said. "He just didn't have power." Elliot crouched beside him, joints protesting. "Power isn't what people think," he said. "It's not control, it's responsibility." Ethan thought about that. Then, why don't more people want it? Elliot's smile faded. Because responsibility doesn't clap back. Late that evening, Claire found a note taped inside her locker. No name, just a sentence written in hurried ink. "You're making things harder for everyone." Her hands shook. She folded the paper and slipped it into her pocket. When she told Elliot, he nodded. "Good." "Good?" she asked. "It means you've hit something real," he said. She looked at him. "I didn't ask for enemies." "You didn't make them," Elliot replied. "They revealed themselves." That night, as the hospital lights dimmed, Daniel Price sat alone in his office, reading compensation charts until the numbers blurred. He saw patterns now. Not data, patterns of who rose and who disappeared. He thought of the boy, of the words, "Rules are supposed to help people do the right thing." Daniel closed the file. Somewhere deep in the building, a system groaned as it shifted. Old weight moved. New cracks formed. Elliot stood at the window, again, city lights flickering below like 1,000 watchful eyes. Change was never quiet. It just waited until someone listened. The lawsuit hit on a Tuesday. Not with a press conference or a warning, but with a courier envelope slid across Elliot Warren's desk by a trembling junior assistant who didn't meet his eyes. Elliot opened it, slowly reading every line with the calm of a man who had expected this long before it arrived. Wrongful termination, hostile work environment, abuse of authority, filed by Dr. Malcolm Reed. Elliot closed the folder and set it down with care. "Good," he said softly. Across the room, Claire stiffened. "Good. It means he's predictable," Elliot replied. "And predictable men make mistakes." By noon, the building buzzed like a kicked hive. Lawyers appeared where nurses had been an hour earlier. Phones rang without pause. Meetings were scheduled, canceled, rescheduled. The story leaked in pieces, distorted and sharpened with every retelling. Former executive alleges retaliation. Hospital founder oversteps authority. Ethics review under fire. Ethan felt the shift even before anyone explained it. The smiles had vanished. The careful politeness, too. People spoke around him now, not to him, voices dropping when he passed. A woman near the elevators hissed, "That's him not quietly enough." Ethan didn't react. He had learned that stillness could be louder than defense. Daniel Price stood at the center of the storm sleeves, rolled up, tie-loosened eyes bloodshot. The compensation review had detonated quietly, exactly as Elliot predicted. Numbers didn't argue, patterns didn't lie. Long protected names appeared again and again, insulated from cuts, shielded from scrutiny. Daniel had signed his own death warrant the moment he let the data speak. He walked into Elliot's office without knocking. "They're circling," he said. Elliot didn't look up from the document he was reading. "They always do." "This time it's different," Daniel said. "Reed's lawsuit gives them cover. They're calling for an emergency vote. They want you out." Elliot finally raised his eyes. "Do they have the votes?" Daniel hesitated. "Not yet." Elliot nodded. "Then they're afraid." Daniel leaned forward. "You could settle. Quietly. Step back. Preserve the institution." Elliot's gaze sharpened. Preserve it, for whom Daniel exhaled. You're asking people to choose between loyalty and survival. No, Elliot said. I'm asking them to notice they've been confusing the two. Down the hall, Claire sat with Patricia Klein again. This time, there were no pleasantries. Legal says your presence complicates things, Patricia said. Claire crossed her arms. Legal said that before. This is different, Patricia replied. Reed is claiming retaliation tied directly to you. Claire felt a familiar heat rise in her chest. Because I existed, Patricia didn't deny it. So, what happens to me? Claire asked. Patricia hesitated. We may need to place you on administrative leave. Temporarily. Claire nodded slowly. With pay, Patricia looked away. We're reviewing that. Claire stood. Then review this, she said, voice steady. I didn't file a complaint. I didn't call a lawyer. I did my job. If that's enough to end a career, the problem isn't me. Patricia swallowed. You're not wrong. That doesn't help, Claire said. Outside, Ethan waited on a bench, hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. When he saw his mother's face, he stood. Are we in trouble? He asked. Claire crouched in front of him. We're in the middle of something, she said carefully. Is that worse? Ethan asked. She didn't answer right away. It's louder. That evening, the board reconvened without Elliot present. Screens flickered to life. Voices sharpened. We need distance, one member said. This is turning into a public spectacle. We can't let sentiment override governance, said another. Daniel listened, jaw tight, as names were floated. Interim leadership, temporary suspension, neutral ground. When it was his turn to speak, he surprised himself. You're all missing the point. Silence followed. This isn't about Elliot Warren. Daniel continued. It's about whether this institution belongs to the people who work here or the people who protect themselves from consequence. A woman scoffed. That's naive. Daniel met her gaze. It's overdue. The vote was postponed. Again. Late that night, Elliot sat alone in his office, the lawsuit open in front of him. Claire knocked softly. You should go home, she said. Elliot didn't look up. I am home. She hesitated. They might come after me harder now. They will, Elliot said. That's how systems defend themselves. Claire swallowed. Then why keep going? Elliot finally looked at her. Really looked. Because stopping now would teach them they're right. Ethan appeared in the doorway, quiet as ever. Mr. Warren, yes. Are you in trouble because of me? The question landed heavy. Elliot stood and walked over, lowering himself to one knee despite the ache. No, he said firmly. I'm in trouble because I waited too long. Ethan frowned. My dad used to say grown-ups mess things up by waiting. Elliot smiled sadly. Your dad was very wise. The next morning, the front page ran the story. A photo of Elliot pale but upright. A caption that questioned his fitness. A quote from Reed's attorney about unchecked power. Phones rang nonstop. Elliot watched the coverage without comment. It's begun, he said. Daniel called an hour later. They're calling a confidence vote. Elliot nodded. Then we finish it. That afternoon, as rain streaked the windows, Elliot walked into the auditorium unannounced. Staff filled the seats. Nurses. Janitors. Techs. People who never saw the boardroom. The room fell silent. I won't keep you long, Elliot said. I know you're tired. He paused. So am I. Eyes locked on him. Some wary, some hopeful. I built this place to heal, he said. If it's hurting the people who keep it alive, then it's broken. And broken things don't fix themselves. A murmur rippled through the crowd. They may vote me out, Elliot continued. They may sue me into the ground. But this doesn't end with me. He looked out at the faces. You deserve a system that doesn't punish decency. When he stepped down, the room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then someone clapped. One pair of hands, then another, then many. Back in his office, Elliot sat heavily heart-pounding. Claire stood beside him. Ethan leaned against the wall, watching the rain. The storm outside thickened. So did the one inside the building. And for the first time, Elliot felt certain of the outcome. Not because he would win, but because they could no longer pretend they hadn't heard him. The vote was scheduled for 9 sharp, but the building woke up hours earlier. By 6, the parking lot was already half full. By 7, security had doubled at every entrance uniforms, crisp eyes alert. By 8, the air inside the auditorium felt charged like a courtroom, before a verdict no one wanted to hear. Elliot Warren sat alone in the front row, hands folded, gaze fixed on the empty stage. He looked smaller than he had a week ago, paler, but there was nothing fragile about the way he held himself. It was the stillness of a man who had already accepted every possible outcome. Behind him, rows filled with staff, nurses and scrubs, techs in faded jackets, custodial workers who had never been invited into a room like this unless something was wrong. They whispered not about the vote, but about what came after, who would stay, who would be punished, who would disappear quietly. Claire sat near the aisle with Ethan beside her. He swung his legs, stopped, then planted his feet flat on the floor, like he'd seen adults do when they were bracing themselves. He felt the tension without understanding all of it. The way people avoided looking at his mother. The way others nodded at her like she'd become a symbol they weren't sure they wanted. Daniel Price stood at the side of the room with a tablet pressed to his chest. He had not slept. He had not shaved. He had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, and every instinct he had ever trained told him to step back. He didn't. At 9:12, the board filed in through the side door. Faces set, smiles tight. Dr. Reed's seat was empty, but his presence lingered like a stain. Lawyers took the back row. The chairwoman adjusted the microphone. "We're here to address concerns regarding leadership," she began. "Specifically, the actions of Elliot Warren." A murmur rippled through the room. Elliot did not move. The chairwoman continued, voice measured. "Given recent events, including litigation and public attention, the board will now vote on a motion of no confidence." The words landed hard. Claire felt Ethan's hand tighten around hers. Before the chairwoman could proceed, a voice rose from the back. Point of order. All heads turned. Daniel stepped forward into the aisle. His voice shook once, then steadied. "This vote violates the hospital charter." The chairwoman frowned. "Mr. Price, this is not your—" "It is," Daniel said, "because the charter requires disclosure of all material conflicts prior to a confidence vote." The room stilled. "What conflicts?" the chairwoman asked sharply. Daniel swallowed. Several board members received compensation adjustments approved under emergency provisions during Elliot Warren's medical incapacity. A gasp, sharp, uncontrolled. "That's outrageous," someone snapped. Daniel lifted his tablet. "The records are clear." The chairwoman's face flushed. "This is highly inappropriate." "It's factual," Daniel replied, "and until it's addressed, this vote is invalid." Elliot finally turned his head, looked at Daniel. Just once. A subtle nod. Permission granted. The chairwoman conferred with the lawyers in frantic whispers. The room buzzed now, energy, breaking through restraint. People leaned forward. Phones appeared. Someone started recording. "We will take a brief recess," the chairwoman said, tightly. "No," Elliot said. The word cut clean through the noise. He stood. The room froze. "I've been quiet long enough," Elliot said. His voice was calm, but it carried. You can't vote your way out of the truth. He looked out at the staff. I won't pretend this is easy. Systems like this are designed to protect themselves. They don't like mirrors. He turned toward the board. You took advantage of my absence. You called it stability. You punished dissent and called it policy. A board member stood. This is defamation. Elliot didn't flinch. This is documentation. Daniel stepped beside him, tablet raised. And it's already been forwarded to the State Oversight Committee. The chairwoman's breath caught. You can't do that. Daniel met her eyes. I already did. The room erupted. Elliot raised a hand. Silence followed slower this time, but it came. I'm not here to beg for my position, Elliot said. I'm here to end a lie. He gestured toward Claire. This woman did her job. You tried to destroy her for it. He looked at Ethan. This boy asked a question you were afraid to answer. He turned back to the board. And you mistook my age for weakness. A lawyer stood. Mr. Warren, given your health. My health is my business, Elliot snapped, and my authority is written into every brick of this building. He paused. Let it settle. The motion of no confidence is withdrawn, the chairwoman said quickly. Elliot shook his head. Too late. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, thicker than the lawsuit. He placed it on the podium. I am invoking the succession clause, he said, effective immediately. The room went dead silent. That clause hasn't been used in decades, someone whispered. Elliot nodded. That's why it still works. Daniel stared at him. Elliot. You'll oversee the transition, Elliot said, with independent counsel. Daniel's eyes widened. Me. You know where the bodies are buried, Elliot replied, and you're scared enough to do the right thing. Daniel swallowed hard. I won't protect anyone, Good Elliot said. Then you're perfect. Elliot turned to the staff. This doesn't end today. It starts. Applause broke out. Not polite, not restrained. Real. Claire felt tears spill before she could stop them. Ethan looked up at her. Did we win? She shook her head gently. No, she said, but they heard us. Elliot stepped down from the stage, his movement slower now. Claire rushed forward instinctively, but he waved her off. I'm all right, he said. She looked at him. You shouldn't have to do this alone. He smiled, tired but genuine. I'm not. As the crowd dispersed, phones buzzing with alerts, Elliot sank into a chair near the exit. His breath came shallow. He closed his eyes for a moment. Daniel knelt beside him. You okay? Elliot opened his eyes. Ask me again tomorrow. Outside, reporters shouted questions. Inside, staff gathered in small clusters, voices alive with something new. Possibility, fear, relief. Ethan stood near Elliot quiet. Mr. Warren, he said. Yes, my dad would have liked you. Elliot's throat tightened. I would have liked him too. The building exhaled. For the first time in years, it felt like it might finally breathe again. The silence after the vote was heavier than the noise that came before it. It settled into the building, slowly, like dust, after a collapse, coating every corridor, every office, every paused conversation. People spoke in low voices now, not because they were afraid to be heard, but because they were afraid of saying the wrong thing in a world that had just shifted beneath their feet. Elliot Warren did not leave the auditorium with the others. He remained seated long after the chairs emptied his hands, resting on his knees, breath shallow but steady. The adrenaline had drained, leaving behind something older and sharper. Consequence. Claire waited near the exit with Ethan watching him from a distance. She recognized the posture, the way strength sometimes looked exactly like exhaustion when it finally allowed itself to surface. Daniel approached Elliot cautiously. The state committee acknowledged receipt, he said quietly. They're moving faster than expected. Elliot nodded. They always do when embarrassment is involved. Daniel hesitated. You handed me a live wire. Elliot looked up at him. You asked to matter. Daniel absorbed that. He glanced around the emptying room. They're already spinning it. Saying you planned this. I did, Elliot said. Just not the way they think. Outside the auditorium, Dr. Reed's attorney was already speaking to reporters, face composed, language sharp. Retaliation, power grab, elder manipulation. The words floated through the glass like smoke. Ethan tugged at his mother's sleeve. They're mad. Claire nodded. Yes. Are they allowed to be? She thought for a moment. They're allowed to feel whatever they want, she said. They're not allowed to hurt people because of it. Ethan considered that. That seems fair. Claire smiled faintly. Fairness had not felt simple in a long time. Later that afternoon, Elliot was admitted overnight against his wishes and under protest. The doctors insisted. The board insisted harder. He agreed only after Daniel promised to stay, and after Claire promised not to disappear. As the hospital dimmed into evening, the mood changed again. Not tense now, watchful, like a city after a verdict. No one knew what would happen next, only that nothing would return to the way it had been. Daniel took over a small conference room and turned it into a war space. Whiteboards filled with timelines, names circled and underlined, policies rewritten in plain language. He worked without pause, fueled by coffee, and a sense of obligation that felt new and terrifying. This isn't how I thought my career would go, he muttered to himself. Marissa, passing by with charts, stopped. Most important things aren't, she said. Daniel glanced up. You don't hate me. Marissa shrugged. Give it time. Claire spent the evening fielding calls she never expected to receive. Environmental services staff thanking her. Nurses apologizing for staying silent. One supervisor warning her to watch her back. She listened to all of it, absorbed it, let it settle. When she finally sat beside Elliot's bed, he looked smaller again. Pale, wired, still unmistakably present. You should go home, he said. So should you, she replied. He huffed a breath. Fair. They sat in silence for a moment, the machines ticking steadily. I didn't plan to make you a symbol, Elliot said. I didn't plan to be one, Claire answered. He looked at her. Do you regret it? She thought of the supply room, of Ethan's clenched jaw, of the note in her locker. No, she said. I regret how long it took me to stop pretending. Elliot nodded. That's the cost. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Across the room, Ethan sat cross-legged on the chair, sketching again. This time, he drew a large circle. Inside it, smaller figures, some shaded, some not. What's that? Elliot asked. Ethan held it up. It's the hospital. Elliot studied it. Why are some people dark? They're tired, Ethan said. I ran out of white. Elliot smiled softly. That happens. News broke late that night. The state announced a formal investigation. Dr. Reed's lawsuit was being reviewed for potential misconduct disclosures. The board issued a statement full of cautious language and promises of transparency. The phone in Elliot's room rang once. Then again. He let it ring. At midnight, Daniel sat alone in the conference room, staring at a list of names. Some he had mentored, some he had ignored, some he had protected because it was easier than asking questions. He closed the file and leaned back. No more, he whispered. The next morning, the hospital woke to a different kind of energy. Not relief, resolve. Elliot was discharged against medical advice, signing the papers with a steady hand. I've done enough resting, he said. As he walked through the lobby, Staff paused. Some nodded, some smiled, some simply watched. Outside, cameras waited. Questions flew. Elliot stopped just short of the doors. He turned back once, scanning the faces behind him. Claire, Ethan, Daniel, Marissa. Dozens more whose names he did not know. "This doesn't belong to me," he said quietly. It never did. Then he stepped into the light. The story was no longer about a man reclaiming power. It was about what happened after the truth refused to sit back down. The months that followed were quieter, which was how real change often announced itself. No headlines, no dramatic votes. Just decisions made in small rooms by people who had learned to lower their voices and raise their standards. Policies rewritten line by line. Departments restructured not around donors or prestige, but around flow access and human limits. The hospital did not become perfect. It became honest. And that, for many, was harder to live with. Elliot Warren no longer came every day. His body had drawn its line, and he respected it now. He appeared when it mattered, walked the floors, slowly stopped to listen more than he spoke. Staff learned that when he asked a question, it was not a trap. It was an invitation. Daniel Price aged 5 years in 3 months. The transition role stripped him bare. Old allies stopped calling. New ones watched him carefully. He slept badly and worked worse, but he didn't look away anymore. When the state committee requested documents, he delivered them without edits. When attorneys warned him about exposure, he nodded and kept going. One afternoon, he sat across from Elliot in the small office by the garden. "I thought integrity would feel cleaner," Daniel said. Elliot smiled faintly. "It rarely does. I might lose everything." Elliot nodded. "Then you'll finally know what it was worth." Daniel absorbed that. He looked older now, less polished, more real. Claire returned to her regular shift by choice. She declined the advisory role that human resources quietly offered, declined the speaking requests, declined the chance to turn herself into a story. She wanted her life back. She wanted to work to clock out, to sit with her son at night, and not feel like the ground was always moving beneath her feet. People treated her differently now, some with gratitude, some with distance, a few with resentment that never quite faded. She accepted all of it. Marissa caught her one evening as they passed in the hall. "You could have left," she said. "Made money. Told your version." Claire shrugged. "I'm still telling it." Ethan noticed the changes more than anyone expected. The hospital stopped feeling like a maze. People bent down when they spoke to him, asked his name, remembered it. The supply room door was repainted. The slap he had never seen but always felt lost its echo. He spent afternoons in the garden Elliot had insisted be reopened. The benches were new, the trees trimmed. He brought his sketchbook and drew less, now watched more. People laughing quietly, arguing softly, existing without fear of being erased. One day he asked Elliot, "Are they done being mad?" Elliot considered it. "Some of them," he said. "Others will stay mad forever. That's their choice." "Does it stop working if they're mad?" "No," Elliot replied. "Sometimes it works better." The investigation concluded without spectacle. Findings released in plain language, sanctions applied where warranted. Quiet resignations followed. No victory lap, no speeches, just consequences. Dr. Reed's lawsuit dissolved under scrutiny, settled without admission, without apology. He disappeared into private consulting, far from decision-making power. His name became something people referenced in cautionary tones. The board reformed itself slowly. Not everyone stayed. New members joined with less certainty and more questions. Meetings ran longer. Votes took time. Elliot attended one, then another, then stopped. He trusted the discomfort to do its work. On a cool autumn morning, Claire received a letter forwarded from the front desk. No return address. Inside was a single sentence, written in careful script. I was wrong. I didn't know how to say it then. She folded it and slipped it into her bag. She did not need to know who sent it. That evening, Elliot sat on a bench in the garden, with Ethan beside him. Leaves fell around them, yellow and red and unremarkable. The city hummed beyond the walls. You changed a lot of people, Ethan said. Elliot shook his head. No. I got out of the way. Ethan kicked at the ground. Do you think they'll forget? Some will, Elliot said. Most won't. The important ones never do. Ethan nodded. My dad used to say forgetting is easier when nothing costs you. Elliot smiled, tired and warm. Your father was right. They sat in silence as the light shifted. Later that week, Elliot called Daniel and Claire into the office one last time. He looked older than he had months before, thinner, peaceful. I'm stepping back completely, he said. Daniel frowned. The committee. They'll manage, Elliot said. They have to. Claire felt a familiar tightening. Are you okay? Elliot met her eyes. I'm done. Not finished. Done. He handed Daniel a slim folder. This stays sealed unless needed. Daniel took it carefully. I won't open it, I know, Elliot said. He turned to Claire. You kept your life. She nodded. You gave it back. Elliot shook his head. You claimed it. As they stood to leave, Ethan lingered. Mr. Warren. Yes. Will you come visit? Elliot smiled. As long as you'll tell me what you're drawing. Ethan grinned. Deal. That night, the hospital lights glowed steady against the dark. Inside, people worked, cared, argued, lived. The story did not end with applause. It settled into something quieter. Something that lasted. Elliot Warren died on a Sunday morning quietly, the way he had finally learned to live. There was no code blue, no alarms, just a nurse noticing that the steady rhythm on the monitor had softened into a long, patient line. Outside the window, the garden he reopened was bright, with early spring light benches still damp with dew leaves just beginning to return. The hospital did not stop when he did. It paused. Just for a breath. The official statement came later. Natural causes. Surrounded by care. Grateful for the years he was given. It used all the right words. It did not capture the truth. The truth was simpler. He had finished what he came back to do. Daniel Price stood in the doorway of Elliot's empty office long after the furniture had been cleared. The walls felt strange without the weight of presence. He held the sealed folder Elliot had given him months before. He still had not opened it. He did not intend to. Some things were not meant to be known, only honored. The hospital board met that afternoon. There were no raised voices this time, no maneuvering. The chair was left empty, not out of respect, but acknowledgement. The system had learned something, and learning once done could not be undone. Claire was on shift when the announcement came over the internal channel. She stopped what she was doing. So did the nurse beside her. So did the technician down the hall. No one spoke. Someone crossed themselves. Someone wiped their eyes quickly and went back to work. At lunch, Marissa sat beside Claire without asking. He saw us, she said. Claire nodded. Yes. That's rare. Yes, Claire said again. She finished her shift and went to the garden. Ethan was already there, sitting on the bench, Elliot-favored sketchbook, open pencil moving slowly. He did not look up when she sat beside him. I know, he said. She rested a hand on his shoulder. He liked you very much. Ethan nodded, jaw tight. He listened. They sat together until the shadows lengthened. The memorial was small. Intentionally so. No donors on stage, no long speeches, just staff. Stories told quietly. Moments shared without polish. A nurse talked about the day policy changed so she could stay with a patient longer. A custodian spoke about not being rushed out of a meeting for the first time in 20 years. Daniel spoke last, voice, steady eyes clear. He didn't save this place, Daniel said. He reminded it who it belongs to. No applause followed. None was needed. Life moved forward. It always did. The hospital continued to evolve unevenly, imperfectly. There were setbacks, arguments, days when old habits tried to creep back in. But there was memory now, and memory resisted erasure. Claire remained where she was. She trained new hires. She spoke up when something felt wrong, not loudly, early. That mattered more. She was no longer invisible. She was also no longer exceptional. Others followed. That mattered most. Ethan grew. His sketches changed. Less architecture, more faces. He stopped drawing the hospital as a whole and started drawing moments instead. A hand on a shoulder. A chair pulled closer. A door held open. One afternoon years later, Daniel found him in the garden again. Taller now. Older. Still quiet. "Your drawings are different," Daniel said. Ethan shrugged. "I see different things." Daniel smiled. That tends to happen. Daniel himself would eventually leave the hospital, not in disgrace, not in triumph. He took a role teaching ethics to administrators who believed they already understood it. He began every course with the same sentence: "Systems are made of people. Act accordingly." Some students rolled their eyes, others listened. That was enough. The hospital stood through seasons, through storms, through moments no one would ever write about. It did what it was meant to do. It cared, sometimes clumsily, sometimes beautifully, always watched now by people who understood that power without conscience was just noise. Elliot Warren's name remained on the building, but it no longer felt like ownership. It felt like a reminder of what happened when someone chose not to look away, of what shifted when a system was forced to remember its purpose. On a quiet afternoon, Claire and Ethan walked past the old supply room. The door was open now. Light spilled out. It was just a room, nothing more, nothing less. Ethan paused. He would have liked this. Claire smiled. Yes, he would have. Some stories end with resolution. This one did not. It settled instead into something steadier, something lived in. The kind of change that does not announce itself, but stays. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to like and subscribe so you can continue following stories about courage, responsibility, and quiet power. And if it resonated, leave a comment with these 3 words: kindness changes systems.